Long before the Parthenon, before Socrates walked the streets of Athens, before the Greeks wrote their first histories, there was a world that Homer sang about. A world of golden masks and bronze swords, of massive walls built by giants, of kings who commanded fleets of 1,000 ships. Homer called it the Age of Heroes. For centuries, scholars dismissed it as poetry, as myth, as a fantasy invented by a blind bard. But the poets were not lying. They were remembering. And buried beneath the hills of Greece lay proof that the Age of Heroes was real. In 1876, a German businessman named Heinrich Schliemann arrived in Greece with a copy of Homer in his hand and a fortune in his pocket. He believed the epics were history, and he intended to prove it. At Mycenae, a ruined citadel in the Peloponnese, he sank his trenches into the earth. What he found stunned the world. Within a circle of standing stones lay royal graves, untouched for more than 3,000 years. The skeletons wore masks of hammered gold, with faces modeled in death, as if the kings had been granted one last portrait before the earth closed over them. Beside them lay swords, cups, and ornaments of gold and silver, offerings for the journey to the next world. Schliemann telegraphed the king of Greece, "I have gazed upon the face of Agamemnon." He was wrong about the owner. The mask is centuries older than the Trojan War. But he was right about the world. These graves belonged to a civilization no one had ever named, a civilization that would come to be called Mycenaean. The Mycenaeans built their strongholds on rocky hills, ringed by walls so massive that later Greeks refused to believe human hands had raised them. They said the walls were built by the Cyclopes, the one-eyed giants of legend, and the name stuck. Cyclopean masonry, archaeologists call it today. Blocks of limestone weighing several tons, fitted together without mortar. At Mycenae, the great gate still stands, crowned by 2 stone lions carved above the lintel, heads long gone, bodies frozen in heraldic pose. Through this lion gate passed kings, soldiers, and merchants for centuries. Nearby stood Tiryns, a fortress whose galleries still echo, and Athens itself, whose citadel the Mycenaeans fortified before the Acropolis ever saw a marble temple. At the heart of each citadel stood the palace, and at the heart of each palace sat a king the tablets called the Wanax. The Wanax was no distant figurehead. He controlled the land, the harvests, the workshops, the armor. Around him gathered officials, priests, and artisans, all fed by the labor of the countryside. The Palace of Pylos, which Homer called the Palace of Nestor, covered thousands of square meters, with storerooms for oil and wine, workshops for perfumers and bronzesmiths, and a great throne room with a circular hearth at its center. Around the hearth, frescoes painted warriors and griffins in vivid color. When a king died, his people buried him in a tholos, a beehive-shaped tomb of stone, entered through a monumental doorway. The largest of them all, the Treasury of Atreus at Mycenae, stood 13 meters high, a dome of corbelled stone that remained the largest in the world until the Romans built the Pantheon. Even its ruins, with the great lintel still in place, are enough to make a modern visitor feel small. This was a warrior society. The palaces stockpiled weapons, and the tablets count chariots by the hundred. Mycenaean nobles rode to war in light chariots, armed with long bronze spears, while elite infantry wore the strangest armor of the ancient world. At Dendra, near Mycenae, excavators found a complete suit of bronze plate, crafted to cover a warrior from neck to ankle, with a boar's tusk helmet crowned with rows of curved tusks. It is the oldest complete suit of armor ever found in Europe. Frescoes show the same warriors hunting boars with spears, hounds at their heels. But the greatest weapon of the Mycenaeans was not bronze, it was the sea. Their ships carried raiders and traders across the Aegean, and their power depended on control of the waves. For centuries, the Mycenaeans wrote nothing that survived, or so it seemed. Then in 1900, at the Palace of Knossos on Crete, archaeologists found clay tablets baked hard by fire, marked with a mysterious script of straight lines and pictograms. Similar tablets turned up at Pylos, Mycenae, and Thebes. For 50 years, the script defied every attempt to read it. It was called Linear B, and it guarded its secret well. In 1952, an architect named Michael Ventris, working with almost no formal training, cracked the code. The language was Greek. The earliest Greek ever written, 3,000 years old. The tablets turned out to be inventories, lists of wool, wheat, olive oil, rowers, chariot wheels, and offerings to the gods. They reveal a rigid, organized world, where every sheep and every jar was counted, and where the king's scribes recorded everything in clay. The Mycenaeans were not only warriors, they were merchants. Their pottery turns up in the ruins of cities from Sicily to Syria, from Egypt to the shores of the Black Sea. The distinctive stirrup jar, with its neat twin handles, carried oil and perfume across the Mediterranean. They imported amber from the distant Baltic, copper from Cyprus, ivory from the great civilizations of the East, and tin from lands that remain a mystery to this day. In return, they traded wine, oil, and finely crafted goods. Their goldsmiths were masters. The Varfeo cups, 2 golden vessels found in a tomb near Sparta, decorated with scenes of wild bulls being captured in nets, hammered in relief with a skill that rivals any goldwork of the ancient world. The mask of Agamemnon, the signet rings, the inlaid daggers, all speak of workshops of extraordinary artistry. The tablets reveal something else, something unexpected. They name the gods. Poseidon, Zeus, Hera, Artemis, Hermes, and even Dionysus all appear in the clay records of the Mycenaean palaces, centuries before Homer wrote. The Greek gods were not invented by later poets. They were worshipped in the Age of Heroes, in the same forms and with many of the same names. Offerings of honey, wine, and grain were carried to shrines, and priests served the gods within the palace itself. The great goddess of the Mycenaean world may have been a figure the Greeks would later call Potnia, the mistress, but around her stood a pantheon that any classical Greek would have recognized. And then there is Troy. Homer's Iliad tells of a war fought because a prince of Troy stole Helen, wife of the Spartan king Menelaus, and of how his brother Agamemnon, king of Mycenae, gathered the heroes of Greece and sailed against the city with 1,000 ships. For 1,000 ships, the Greeks burned the city and won. For generations, historians treated the tale as pure invention. Then, in the 1870s, Schliemann excavated a great mound in northwestern Turkey called Hisarlik, and found not one city but 9, built layer upon layer. One of them, called Troy Via by archaeologists, was destroyed by fire around the year 1180 BC, at exactly the time the Age of Heroes would have ended. Whether Helen's face truly launched those ships we may never know, and the war's exact shape will always remain a matter of debate. But the war that Homer described now seems to stand on a foundation of historical truth. Around 1200 BC, the world of the Mycenaeans began to unravel. Within a few generations, the palaces were burned, one by one. Pylos fell first, then Mycenae, then Tiryns. The great walls stood, but the world behind them collapsed. The tablets stopped, the writing died, the workshops fell silent. Population dwindled, and Greece entered 400 years of darkness, an age without writing, without palaces, without cities. The causes are still debated: raiders from the sea, internal revolt, drought, the collapse of trade, or all of these together. But something survived. The songs. The stories of heroes, of golden masks and great walls, of the war at Troy. They were passed from mouth to mouth for centuries, until a poet called Homer fixed them in verse. And so the Age of Heroes was not lost. It became the seed of Greek identity, the memory that shaped classical civilization, and the reason that, 2,500 years later, we still look back in wonder at the Mycenaeans, and call their world the world of heroes.